They called it impossible. They called it madness. They called it the Landkreuzer P-1000 Rata, the land cruiser, a tank so massive that even the earth beneath Germany seemed unprepared to carry it. Conceived in desperation and arrogance, it was to be Adolf Hitler's answer to defeat, a 1,000-ton fortress on tracks. Longer than a U-boat, taller than a house, armored thicker than a battleship's hull. A tank not meant to fight, but to intimidate God. But long before it faced a single shell, before it rolled into any battlefield, before the enemy could ever lay eyes upon it, the Rata was doomed. It would die not by fire, but by physics, by logistics, by the very reality of war that even dictators cannot command. The first man to touch its blueprints was not a soldier, but an engineer, Dr. Eduard Groth. He had designed mining machines before the war, colossal excavators with metal jaws that could chew through mountains. Hitler saw those machines and demanded something worse, a weapon of pure excess, a machine that would flatten forests with its weight and cities with its guns. Groth, a man who once designed machines to unearth coal, now sketched a machine to bury nations. The first sketches horrified even those who supported it. 2 naval 280mm guns, same as on a battleship, mounted side by side in a turret larger than most houses. 8 anti-aircraft guns ringing the hull, 228mm cannons on the rear, 6 torpedo tubes, because someone insisted it might need to destroy ships while crossing bridges. The engine room alone was the size of a train station. To move it, they planned to strap together not 1, not 2, but 6 U-boat diesel engines, screaming together in synchronized agony. It would be nearly 40 meters long, 14 meters wide, taller than a 2-story building. It would weigh 1,000 tons, 10 times heavier than the heaviest Allied tank. The first problem appeared before a single bolt was cast. They tested scaled weight on a section of rail line, standard German gauge, and the prototype axle crushed the track like bread. Concrete runways shattered beneath test loads. Bridges, not a chance. Even dirt roads sagged after a few meters. One junior officer observing whispered, "This isn't a tank. It's a building pretending to move." But Hitler didn't care about roads or bridges. He wanted a symbol. Something to make Allied spies choke on their reports. Something so colossal that when its silhouette appeared on the horizon, entire battalions would surrender from disbelief. "We will drive it through London like a parade float," he reportedly said. Let their king watch it from his palace. Inside the Krupp factory in Essen, where the first hull plates were forged, the workers had no illusions. They whispered to each other while hammering on steel thicker than any they'd touched. Some cursed the project, calling it blasphemy. Others said nothing. They had lost brothers on the Eastern Front and welcomed anything that promised revenge. But even they knew. They had eyes. They had hands. The plates were so heavy that overhead cranes bent. Drill bits snapped on impact. Welding torches sputtered on the metal like raindrops on iron cliffs. One welder named Jakob said later after the war, "I remember touching that first armor plate. It was cold as a tombstone. I thought, this thing is not meant to move. It is meant to be buried." Meanwhile, Allied intelligence had caught wind. Not precise details, not yet, but whispers, intercepted cables, references to Panzer Monster, Wunderwaffe, Rata. The British generals laughed at first. "What will they do with it? Station it in Berlin and hope we trip over it?" But American analysts weren't so quick to dismiss it. They had seen what the Tiger tanks did to Shermans. They had seen Panthers swallow shells like stones. If the Germans wanted to build something 10 times worse, better to plan for it. A special report circulated among Allied officers in 1944. It was simply titled, "Projected Super Heavy Armor, Feasibility and Countermeasures." It concluded with a line underlined in red. If such a machine exists, it must not be allowed to reach open battle. The irony. It never would, but that doesn't mean men didn't bleed for it. In an underground bunker near Magdeburg, the first mock-up of the Rata's lower hull sat like a dead whale. Soldiers were brought in to test entry procedures. How quickly could a full crew mount it? They got lost inside. Corridors ran like intestines. The vents roared hot air from the simulated engines. Some of the testers emerged vomiting from the fumes. They calculated a full crew size, minimum 50 men. Maximum? Unknown. It was less a tank and more a barracks. One captain wrote in his log, "We don't need drivers. We need janitors." They attempted a mobility test with a half-weight platform on reinforced tracks. It moved 6 meters before the suspension buckled. They upgraded the springs. It moved 20 meters before the fuel injectors overheated. They installed additional cooling. It moved 30 meters before the steel track shoes bent like spoons. Every improvement caused a new failure. Every kilogram of reinforcement added 2 kilograms of problem. But the Wehrmacht commanders were not laughing. They were furious. They needed Panthers, not parades. They needed fuel, not fantasies. They begged the high command to cancel the P-1000. They argued that it would drain steel that could build 100 anti-tank guns. Hitler refused. He demanded that construction continue at any cost, and so factories worked through the winter. Steel shipments were diverted from submarines. Workers froze at their stations. One machinist was crushed when a hull panel slipped from its rigging. It took 20 men to pull his broken body free. They laid him beside the unfinished chassis. His blood steamed on the cold steel. No one spoke. In late 1944, Allied bombers found the Essen plant. Sirens howled over the workshops just as a new turret ring was being hoisted. The crane operator tried to lower it gently, but the blast shook the ceiling. The turret ring swung sideways and slammed into support beams. Sparks flew like lightning as it tore free, crashing into the floor with a sound no human throat could imitate. The workers scattered like ants. After the raid, engineers surveyed the damage. The turret ring had cracked. It weighed 200 tons, unliftable without replacing the entire overhead system. They didn't have time. The war was collapsing. The Russians were marching toward Berlin. American armor was surging across France. Reality at last did what reason could not. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, finally signed the cancellation order. Construction would cease immediately. All resources were to be redirected to practical defense. The Rata was to be buried, figuratively and literally, but Hitler refused to accept the decision quietly. In a final fit of delusion, he demanded that one prototype be at least partially assembled to be displayed in Berlin, to prove to the world what Germany could have built if only time had allowed. They loaded the broken hull components onto transport platforms. But the rail lines had been destroyed. They attempted to move it by road. The trailers cracked under the weight. They left it where it lay, half buried in a snow-dusted rail yard. Soldiers used it as shelter from wind. Some slept against it. One carved into the steel with a knife. Even giants fall. The war ended before the Rata ever left the ground it rested on. Allied troops found fragments. A turret base here, a hull plate there. American soldiers posed beside one section for photographs, laughing and knocking on it like a wall. One of them wrote home, "If this thing had rolled, we'd all be pancakes." After the war, the pieces were cut up and melted down. Some went into bridges, some into cars, some into farm tools. Perhaps somewhere, in a quiet German field, a tractor plows soil using metal that was once meant to crush nations. In 1963, an elderly engineer, Dr. Grote, was interviewed in a small apartment in Bremen. He refused to take pride in the machine. It was a fantasy, he said. A fever dream of a dying regime. I designed engines to move Earth. They asked me to move war. War is heavier. When asked if the Rata would have worked had it been completed, he answered honestly, no, it would have sunk into its own weight. It was not a weapon. It was a monument to arrogance. Today people see drawings of the Rata and laugh. They look like something from science fiction, a child's sketch. But it was no joke to the men who built it, to the men who feared it, to the men who died for the resources it stole. The Rata never fired a shell. It never reached a battlefield. It never even stood upright as a complete machine. And yet, it left a crater in history, not by rolling over cities, but by proving a truth older than war itself. Some monsters are too big not to fail. Not every weapon dies in fire. Some die in their own shadow. The Landkreuz P-1000 did not truly die when Speer signed its cancellation papers. Bureaucracy can kill a budget line. It cannot kill an idea. And this idea had already poisoned too many minds. Even after the order went out to cease construction, some engineers continued in secret. Loyalty, fear, or simple inability to let go of a dream too large to fit in a grave. No one could say. They gathered at night in the Essen workshop, poring over schematics under flickering bulbs. They spoke in hushed tones, their faces gaunt from malnutrition and sleeplessness. Bombs thudded in the distance like a giant's heartbeat. One of them drew a finger along the hull outline and whispered, "We built a god too big to worship." In Poland, far from the drafting tables, men were dying to feed its birth. Not soldiers, slaves, forced laborers dragged from villages, wrists bound, lungs full of soot. They hammered steel plates until their palms bled, heated rivets until their skin blistered. One man named Marek remembered lowering his hand too slowly and catching a molten bolt between his fingers. He screamed. His overseer struck him with a cane and ordered him back to work. That night, Marek dreamed of the machine coming alive, not as a tank, but as a beast of iron, crawling toward him across twisted soil. He woke to the sound of sirens and thought it had come for him. The Rada had become more than a machine. It was a curse, a weight on every factory it touched. Meanwhile, in Berlin, it was still treated like myth. Hitler mentioned it occasionally, slurring between rage and fantasy, telling his staff that soon the Allies would see what German mind and will could do. His generals stared straight ahead, saying nothing. They had seen the casualty lists from Kursk. They had watched their divisions eaten alive by Soviet armor. They no longer believed in miracles, only delays. Still, the rumor of the monster filtered down the ranks. Frontline soldiers heard whispers. A tank larger than a house, unstoppable, invulnerable. Some mocked it. Some believed it. In a foxhole near the Oder, a young grenadier named Franz heard a radio operator describe it. "They say it's as big as a church," the operator muttered. "Tracks wider than a man is tall." Franz stared into the mud. His friend Eric spat and shook his head. "What good is a church without a god?" Franz didn't answer. That night he dreamed of walking through a ruined city. The sky was black with smoke. In the distance he heard metal scraping stone. A shape emerged through the haze, towering, shuddering. Its hull was dripping. Not water, blood. Men were stuck to its sides like insects crushed into tar. Faces in the armor, screaming. His own face among them. He woke shivering. When morning came, he volunteered for frontline duty, preferring enemy bullets to waiting for the monster. Across the channel, Allied intelligence grew uneasy. Reports came in, some absurd, some chilling. Aerial photos showed large tracks being reinforced near industrial towns. Railroad bridges widened, steel shipments vanishing. One agent reported overhearing Wehrmacht officers mocking something they called the church on wheels. Another said locals believed the Germans were building a land battleship bigger than any building we own. At Bletchley Park, analysts argued heatedly. "This is propaganda," one insisted. "They're trying to scare us into overreaction." "Maybe," another said quietly. "But what if they're not?" Silence fell. The room felt colder. British command issued an order. All intelligence on super-heavy armor was to be collected, analyzed, assumed possible until proven otherwise. Plans were drafted. How to bomb it if it moved, how to trap it in soft ground, how to lure it onto weak bridges. The Rada had already changed strategy, without ever leaving blueprints. Meanwhile, in the Krupp compound, they tested fuel calculations. How many liters per kilometer? The answer was so absurd they rechecked 3 times. One engineer looked at the figures and muttered, "This thing will burn a village for every mile." And then there was the soil problem. A professor from Munich ran a stress simulation. He delivered his report in person, sweating through his collar despite the cold. "It will sink," he said simply. "Sink into what?" asked a colonel. "Into anything," they laughed. He did not. "You build this machine, you will watch it bury itself alive." But nothing changed. The project staggered forward like a corpse refusing the grave. Then came the winter of 1944. Food ran low. Coal ran low. Morale ran lower. One morning, a boy no older than 16 arrived at the Essen factory. Blonde hair, pale cheeks. Hitler Youth insignia still bright. He saluted nervously. "I've come to learn engineering," he said. The foreman stared at him. Behind the boy, a cow wandered through the yard, stray livestock from bombed farms nearby. The boy saluted again. The foreman's eyes softened. He took the boy inside. They put him on cleanup duty. Sweeping metal shavings, organizing bolts. Once he was asked to help carry a rivet gun to the Rada's lower assembly. He approached the steel wall, ran his hand across it. The cold shot into his bones. "It feels wrong," he whispered. The older welder grunted. "It's a tombstone." For all of us. The boy said nothing, but that night he cried quietly in the dormitory, curled beneath a coat. Not because he feared death, but because he feared being part of something evil and not knowing how to escape it. Outside Germany, Soviet agents were listening. One informant embedded in a port town reported hearing dock workers mention a machine that will crush even Stalin. The message made its way to Moscow. Stalin read it, laughed, then stopped laughing. He issued an order. If Germans build monster, we build bigger. And so a shadow war of fantasies began. Men fighting over illusions while real men starved in trenches. Back in Essen, a snowstorm hit. They tried to move one of the unfinished sections to storage. Chains snapped in the cold. A support beam groaned. The entire panel, 30 tons, slid sideways. A worker named Lech slipped on the ice. The metal caught his leg. The crunch was louder than any gunshot. He screamed until his lungs tore. They couldn't lift the weight. They tried jacks. They bent. They tried crowbars. They snapped. Lech froze as much from shock as cold. He stopped screaming. He whispered, "Tell my wife. I fought a giant. He died before morning." They left his body beneath the plate until a crane could be repaired. One of the foremen said nothing for hours. Then he walked outside into the blizzard and never returned. Rumors spread that he walked toward the river and didn't stop walking. The Rada had claimed more lives standing still than most tanks did in motion. By February 1945, when Speer finally buried the program for good, no one rejoiced. They were too tired, too numb. One engineer tore up the blueprints. Another burned them. A third folded his carefully and hid them in a wall, like a priest securing forbidden scripture. He would later claim he did it, so history would know how far madness goes when no one says no. In April, American forces entered the Essen facility. They found twisted beams, shattered cranes, half-machined steel. They found fragments of a monster too big to be born. One soldier climbed atop a section of track, each length the size of a sofa, and urinated on it. Another took a photograph, grinning beside the broken hull. His hands trembled as he smiled. That night, he drank alone and stared at the photo. He later told his grandson, "I wasn't smiling because we won. I was smiling because, thank God, it never moved." But for some, that was not enough. In 1946, Allied scientists compiled full reports on captured weapons. In one section labeled Ultra-Heavy Tank Proposals, the Rata was featured. The summary ended with a stark warning. Let this remain theoretical. Should any nation ever pursue such a machine in earnest, it will not win war. It will consume it. But humans are curious. In the late 1960s, Soviet engineers revisited the concept. They designed sketches of their own megatanks. Most were discarded. A few remained, classified. In the 1980s, American think tanks discussed land battleships for desert warfare. They laughed at the Rata, then quietly asked what if. Even today, deep in internet forums, young men sketch digital monsters. Tracks wider than trucks, guns longer than buses. They post them and write, "Imagine if this was real." They do not smell the soot. They do not hear Lech scream. Monsters never truly die. They hibernate in blueprints, in fantasies, in the quiet arrogance of those who believe size equals strength. The Rada did not fail because it broke. It failed because we break first, when ambition outgrows humanity, when steel outweighs the soul, when men forget that the earth itself will not carry such sins. Some machines are too heavy for war, too heavy for peace, too heavy for time itself. The Rata was never driven, but it drove men mad. Its tracks never churned soil. But they left ruts in history deeper than any crater, and long after the last scrap was melted, the ground where it lay still sinks in the rain, as if the earth remembers and refuses to forget. The war ended, but the shadow of the Rata did not. Germany lay broken. Cities were piles of bone and brick. Roads were rivers of mud. Bridges hung like snapped tendons across rivers that reflected the smoke of a dying world. But beneath this ruin, buried in workshops and scrap yards, remained pieces of something too large to be forgotten. The Americans melted what they could. The Soviets took what they couldn't. Some fragments were hauled away to be tested. Others lay too heavy to move. Locals built fences around them, not out of respect but out of fear. Children were told not to go near the factory pits. Not because of radiation, not because of mines, but because the metal whispers at night. A rumor began. They said that on cold mornings, when mist rolled over the abandoned rail lines, the steel plates creaked, not from frost, but from settling, like something breathing beneath the snow. Old men claimed to hear chain clanks where no tank ever moved. Dogs refused to go near the place. Birds would not land on the beams. Nature itself recoiled. One farmer, plowing a nearby field in 1947, felt his tractor jolt. He climbed down and dug until his fingers bled. He struck steel. He uncovered a corner of something monstrous, rusted and jagged like the rib of a leviathan. He ran without speaking. He sold the land for nothing. The next owner built a barn over it to hide it from sight, or from God. Meanwhile, in Moscow, engineers pored over photographs of the Rata's hull. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others smiled. They saw not madness, but potential. They drafted their own plans. Land battleships for the frozen tundras. Self-propelled guns that could crush villages by driving through them. One older general entered the room during a briefing. He glanced at the drawing. His face turned gray. "Stop," he said. No one moved. "You build this," he whispered, "and one day it will be used. And when it is, you will see men crushed like weeds. Roads will crack, bridges will scream, and you will not win quickly. You will win slowly, inch by inch, with bodies as traction." They shelved the project, but they did not burn it. Ideas like that are never burned. They are stored, quietly, coldly, like frozen seeds waiting for spring. Across the ocean, in America, researchers at Aberdeen Proving Ground dissected one of the captured track links. They struck it with sledgehammers. They shot it with rifles. They filled it with explosives. It still held shape. One colonel pressed his palm against it. "This is not armor," he muttered. "It's denial." The lab reports concluded, impractical, immovable, indestructible. A paradox on treads. In the years that followed, people forgot the name. History books reduced it to a footnote. Proposed super-heavy tank, never completed. But ghosts do not care for footnotes. In the villages around Essen, people began speaking of the Stahlgeist, the steel spirit. They said if you walked near the ruins at night, you could feel the ground vibrate, as if something beneath it still wanted to wake. Some claimed to see faint lights flickering within the fog, like welding torches flashing in darkness, though no workers remained. Others heard grinding like gears turning after years of dust. One night in 1952, a drunk vagrant took shelter near one of the buried sections. He was found the next morning, face pale as ash, hands clamped over his ears. He never spoke again. When asked what happened, he scratched one word into the dirt. Laufend, running, but nothing had moved, or so they believed. In the 1960s, West German development expanded into former factory zones. Survey teams brought ground-penetrating devices to scan for buried hazards. One scanner passed over a forgotten pit near Duisburg. The instrument froze. The screen went black. When rebooted, it showed a shape, massive, unnatural, like a shipwreck entombed in earth. The technicians stared at the silhouette until one muttered, "That was never supposed to be there." The report was buried as unexplained interference. They built a shopping center over it. Sometimes, late at night, the mall lights flicker. The security cameras shake. No one talks about it. Meanwhile, in wartime museums, visitors press their hands against tank hulls and marvel at thickness. They read plaques about tigers and panthers and whisper about their might. No plaque speaks of the Rata, no hull remains to touch, but some swear they feel a hum beneath the floor. The children press their ears to the ground and hear, breathing. The Rata was never given a funeral. It was not buried with ceremony, nor mourned, nor declared dead. It was simply left, not destroyed, not commemorated, just abandoned like a corpse too heavy to lift. But corpses rot. Steel doesn't. It waits. In the decades after the war, Germany rebuilt. New highways cut through the land like arteries, pumping commerce through fresh veins. Factories rose over ruins. Supermarkets were built where shells once fell. The dead were buried under foundations, but not all of them. Some were too large to move. In 1971, construction workers digging a new freight line outside Essen struck something solid beneath 12 feet of earth. At first they thought it was bedrock. Then someone recognized rivet seams beneath the rust. They unearthed only a corner. The rest continued into darkness like a buried ship. Management ordered them to pour concrete over it and reroute the tracks. No official report was. Fouled men drank heavily that night. One quit on the spot. He swore he heard something inside the metal, like knocking, not echo, knocking. That same year, a Soviet recon satellite photographed a heat anomaly in the same region, faint, deep beneath the ground. Too regular to be natural. Some analysts flagged it, others dismissed it. The file was archived, buried, like everything connected to that machine. Meanwhile, in small-town bars across West Germany, war veterans spoke freely for the first time. Some talked about the Eastern Front, others about Normandy, but a few, always the drunkest, always at the end of the night, whispered about the giant that never woke. One former logistics officer claimed he saw it, not in blueprints, not in parts, but whole, standing. Once, he said they assembled a mock-up in a quarry outside Pilsen. No engines, no guns, just frame and armor, standing like a dormant god. He was ordered to inspect fuel truck access routes. He walked beneath its hull. He placed a hand on the track. It was warm, though the sun had not reached that side. He asked the foreman why. The foreman just said, "Machines remember heat." The officer trembled as he finished the story. He said they blew it up days later to prevent capture. But at night he still woke sweating, feeling that heat creeping through his palm. In the 1980s, long after such tales were considered ghost stories, a group of urban explorers, teenagers, broke into an abandoned foundry near Essen. They filmed their adventure with a camcorder. The footage was recovered later by police. The recording is grainy. Their laughter echoes in the empty halls. They descend through rusted catwalks, graffiti on the walls. At one point, they find a sealed blast door half open. One boy jokes that treasure lies within. They push inside. The camera light flickers over vast metal remnants, circular mountings, broken beams. The boy holding the camera begins breathing faster. "Guys, this is a tank factory." They find a chamber deeper down. The camera pans across the floor. Tracks. Massive stone-crushing tracks, half buried in dust. One boy kneels and measures himself against a single link. He barely reaches halfway. Then, faintly, a sound, clank. Not an echo, not a drip, a distinct metallic clank, like chain on chain. Someone whispers, shaking their voice, No, that's not possible." The camera trembles. The sound grows louder, not rhythmic, not steady like something trying to move but trapped. The light swings wildly. Dust rains from the ceiling. They run. The camera falls. The footage ends. Police found the camera 2 days later. The boys were never found. The area was sealed. Fines were issued for trespassing. Case closed. Unofficially, the officer who reviewed the tape resigned. His wife said he woke screaming every night afterward, clutching his ears, shouting, "Make it stop! Make it stop moving." Time passed, technology advanced, but monsters do not care for eras. They sleep beneath all of them. In the 2000s, satellite imaging teams from universities began cataloging abandoned wartime sites. One researcher flagged an unusual rectangular disturbance pattern in the soil near a quarry lake outside Duisburg. Metallic signature, too large to be vehicle wreckage, too regular to be natural. She brought the image to her supervisor. He froze. He walked to a cabinet, unlocked it, and pulled out an old photocopy from Allied archives, a scale outline of the P-1000 Rada. He laid it beside the satellite image. The shapes matched. He stared at the researcher. "Forget this," he said. She didn't. She returned alone at night with ground-penetrating radar. The readings overloaded. The machine shut off with a shriek. She dug with her hands until her nails cracked. She struck steel. She touched it. It was warm. She fled and never returned. Her report was quietly dismissed as equipment malfunction, but she kept one photo, a blurred image of her trembling, hand against something dark and curved, too vast to comprehend. She keeps it in a drawer. Sometimes she takes it out, just to remind herself it's still there waiting, because that is what the Rata became. Not a weapon, not a machine, not even a failure, but a presence, a mass buried beneath time, too heavy to lift, too terrible to erase, heavy not just in weight, but in meaning, a symbol of when war stopped being about killing, and became about proving who could build the bigger nightmare. A reminder that some ideas cannot be killed by treaties or bombs. They rust, they sink, they wait, and perhaps one day, when the ground shudders in some forgotten forest, humanity will remember what it tried to hide. The greatest monsters never roared, they rumbled. By the 2010s, the legends were supposed to be dead. The war was 3 generations gone. School children no longer spoke of panzers and blitzkrieg. They spoke of smartphones and viral videos. But the internet has a way of resurrecting what should stay buried. It started on obscure military forums. A user posted a photo, low resolution, taken at night, showing a vast rusted curve emerging from mud beside a lake. He claimed it was taken near a restricted zone in North Rhine-Westphalia. Others laughed, called it Photoshop, until a second photo appeared days later, this time from a drone. A shape beneath shallow water. Long, rectangular, lined with repeating arcs like ribs. Beneath the silt, barely visible but undeniable, tracks wider than a car. Satellite sleuths jumped on it. Reddit threads exploded. Digital archaeologists began overlaying wartime maps with modern topography. Some found inconsistencies, earth mounds that didn't match farming patterns, unnatural depressions in forests, areas where soil density readings abruptly spiked. One user, going by the handle Eisenwolf, compiled every anomaly into a single satellite composite. When the image was posted, the comment section fell silent, not because it was fake, but because it was too precise. Half in forest, half beneath a shallow lake, aligning perfectly to dimensions once scrawled on Nazi engineering blueprints. Lay the outline of something 300 feet long. A YouTuber announced a live expedition. He gathered a crew, rented ground scanners, and drove into the woods one crisp October morning. Thousands watched his live stream. The comments were filled with memes. Land battleship boss fight, Rata DLC, Final Reich expansion pack. Then, the signal grew unstable. The camera flickered, a distant metallic groan echoed through the trees. Not thunder, not wind. A weight shifting beneath. Earth. The crew fell silent. One whispered, "Did you feel that?" The stream cut out. They never uploaded a follow-up. Their van was found abandoned near the tree line. Equipment missing. Footprints leading toward the lake. None returning. Police declared it an accident, but villagers nearby stopped walking their dogs in the woods. They said at night, the trees vibrated, as if something beneath the soil was breathing. Governments noticed, not publicly, quietly. Within defense circles, a new phrase entered classified discussions. Dormant megastructures, category, WU unrecovered assets. Some argued it was nothing but buried scrap. Others argued it was a biological hazard, a magnetic phenomenon, an unknown risk. One NATO advisor put it bluntly in a sealed brief. It is not a weapon anymore. It is a question, and we don't know how to answer it. A recovery proposal was drafted to excavate it fully. It was rejected. Official reason, too costly, too unstable, too politically sensitive. Unofficial reason, what if we wake it? In 2022, a private research firm obtained LiDAR scans of the area. Their leaked internal note said, primary structure intact, composition unusually resilient, internal cavities still present, possible chambers, unknown residual energy readings. Recommend non-invasive monitoring only. Residual energy, from a machine that never powered on, or one that still is. Today, hikers sometimes claim to hear deep grinding underfoot when passing through that region. Locals call it der Schläfer, the sleeper. Most laugh it off. Most, but some, especially the old, refuse to go near it. One former factory worker, now 92, was interviewed anonymously last year. When shown modern drone footage of the suspected site, he trembled violently and refused to look. "It should have been broken," he whispered. "It wasn't." Tears rolled down his face. "You people think it's history. But metal remembers. It remembers being born. It remembers being abandoned. You think it wants to sleep forever? No, it wants to finish waking up. And perhaps one day, it will. Not by roaring to life, not by rolling across cities, but by reminding the world of what waits beneath ambition unchecked. Because the Rata was never just a tank. It was an experiment in how far madness could be industrialized. And madness never dies. It rusts, it sinks, it waits. They Sent a team once, not officially, not publicly, but quietly. This was not the YouTuber crew, not the teenagers with camcorders. These were professionals, extraction specialists, black site contractors wearing unmarked uniforms and faces that had forgotten how to smile. They arrived at night in unmarked trucks, lights blacked out. Locals saw shadows moving between trees, heard the creak of heavy crates, the thud of metal stakes in soil. No one asked questions. They closed their shutters and pretended sleep. In Germany, some memories are so old they live in the bones. You feel when something wrong is happening. You feel it in your teeth. They deployed sensors first. Seismic probes, magnetic resonance rods that they hammered into the ground like stakes meant to tame some buried demon. The forest floor responded immediately, not with movement, but with resistance, as if the earth itself clenched. One technician remarked that every signal pulse came back slower than it should. Not absorbed, not scattered, delayed. Like it's traveling through something thick, he muttered. Like bone, another replied. Hours passed. The crew moved silently, mapping a three-dimensional outline beneath their feet. They said little. Some hummed nervously without realizing. Others kept touching their sidearms, though there was nothing to shoot. Then someone tripped an anomaly. A probe slipped deeper than expected, too deep, too suddenly, like falling through a gap. They gathered around the hole, shining lights, only darkness, no stone. No soil, just a hollow. They widened the opening with shovels. Rusted metal appeared, curved, concave. Not a plate, a hatch. One of them whispered something no one wanted to hear. It's facing up, as if it were meant to be opened. They contacted command, asked for permission to force entry. Silence on the radio. Then a flat voice replied, "Do not enter." Someone scoffed. Someone else cursed. They set up a winch. They ignored the order. It took them 1 hour to break the rusted locks. Beneath the snow and moss, the hatch gave way with a shriek so deep it rattled teeth. Air escaped, not like gas or pressure, like breath, stale, warm, metallic, not. Dead air, trapped air. They lowered a camera drone. Into the opening. It spun slowly through the dust. The light flickered across steel corridors wide enough for trucks. Pipes lined the ceiling like veins. Condensation dripped in slow, heavy droplets, as if the place was sweating. Then the drone panned left, a wall of massive cylinders. Engine blocks, still intact. Cables coiled like entrails. Some still faintly gleaming beneath grime as if coated in oil that refused to dry. The feed crackled. Something moved in the distance, not an animal. Not wind, something metallic, dragging. The drone light flickered. Static washed over the feed. Then, for half a second, caught between frames, a shape appeared, not clear, not defined. But there curved, rising as if lifting from rest. A rumbling noise came through the speakers, low, sustained. Not machine, not nature, a groan. The operator backed the drone up frantically. He shouted to abort, to seal the hatch, to bury it again. Command finally responded, seal, destroy, leave, do not return. They tried. They dragged steel sheets over the opening. They poured concrete. They detonated charges. The ground shook. The forest absorbed the blast. When the dust settled, the hole was gone, but the soil bulged upward, as if something beneath had swelled. One of the crew fled the site and was never found. Another resigned the next day. The leader refused to speak at all. The last recorded words from the site supervisor, sent in a private encrypted log before going silent, were, "It's not a relic. It's not broken. It's waiting for orders," they returned. Not officially, not with government sanction. No flags, no insignias, just 5 men. All former engineers, former soldiers, former believers in logic. Men who had once trusted numbers and measurements. Now each carried more ammunition than instruments. Their mission was not to explore, it was to verify. They wore respirators, not for chemicals but for smell. Reports from the first descent had mentioned it. Warm, metallic, wet. The scent of a living wound. They pried open the makeshift slab of steel and concrete that had been hastily welded over the hatch. It shuddered beneath their crowbars, like muscle-resisting incision. The cold night air sank into the hole, and warm breath exhaled back. One man gagged behind his mask. They descended. The ladder was not built by them. It was not from their world. It was welded decades ago, iron rungs as thick as wrists, bolted into curved walls that echoed at touch. Their lights flickered against condensation-coated steel. Drops rolled down the surface, reflecting their faces in warped streaks. Their boots met the floor with a hollow clang. Not like metal on metal, like bone on ribcage. They moved forward, weapons raised but feeling ridiculous. Guns meant for flesh, bullets made for lungs and hearts. What heart could they shoot here? The main corridor stretched before them, wide, arched, lined with cables like nerves. Somewhere far down, water dripped in slow rhythms, not random, measured, almost like a pulse. Plink, plink, plink. One pointed his light at the ceiling. Frost. No, not frost. Crystals formed around heat residue patterns, like breath frozen mid-exhale. The heat didn't come from above. It came from metal itself. They reached the engine chamber. It should have been silent, but it throbbed. The engine blocks, massive, rusted shells of diesel monstrosities, were trembling ever so slightly. Not shaking, pulsing, expanding and contracting millimeters at a time, like lungs. One man raised his hand and placed it on the surface. It was warm. No, hot. He recoiled instantly, clutching his palm. His skin smoked. Still. Running, he whispered. Impossible, another said. Then the first man replied, Then why does it feel like it's waiting? They continued deeper, against every instinct. The hatch behind them felt like a mouth closed shut. They entered what appeared to be crew quarters, rusted bunks, decayed tables, scattered bolts and tools still lying as if dropped mid-use, but there were no bodies, no skeletons, no scraps of uniform, only indentations, human-shaped, in rust, in dust, as if men had once sat there, for so long that their absence left silhouettes. One of the team muttered, Where did they go? A voice answered, Not theirs, not human. Metal pressed against metal, dragging slowly somewhere deeper in the hull. A groaning call, like a whale song played through broken speakers. The walls responded, pipes vibrated, condensation shook loose. Rust flakes rained from the ceiling. One man fell to his knees, clutching his ears. Stop, stop, it's talking. But the others heard nothing, only pressure, like standing beneath an avalanche that hasn't fallen yet. Ahead, a chamber opened wider. They realized what it was, ammunition storage. Or what was meant to be. Hundreds of empty racks lined the walls, meant to hold naval shells the size of men. None were present. The floor was scorched, blackened. Something had burned here, not from explosion, from heat, sustained heat, something hotter than fire, applied not to destroy but to hollow. The floor was warped inward, as if something had lain there, or been born there. One of the men whispered, What if it did run once? Another whispered back, What if it is running now, just... Slowly they backed away, weapons shaking, lights cutting frantic beams across, corrosion like diseased flesh. The corridor behind them was darker than before, not because their lights dimmed, because something was casting shadow from behind them. But nothing moved when they turned, only the sound, slow, deep, vibrating through their bones. Metal, shifting, not crumbling, not settling, flexing. One man screamed. He didn't know why. He ran. The others followed. Their lights swung wildly, catching glimpses, not shapes, not figures, just motion where no machine should move, pipes swelling like veins, walls bulging like muscle beneath strain, bolts creaking like teeth under pressure. They reached the ladder. One. Climbed. He made it halfway, then froze. The rungs trembled, not from their weight, from below, as if something pressed. Upward. He looked down. His mask hid his face. But his eyes widened. He whispered, It's waking. Then the rung beneath his foot buckled. Upward. Like a spine arching. He was launched. He hit the ceiling. Then the floor. His head cracked open like fruit. The others didn't check him. They didn't cry out. They climbed over him like rats fleeing flood, out into moonlight, out into air that felt too thin, as if the earth itself had inhaled. They sealed the hatch. This time, they didn't weld it. They covered it with explosives. They detonated. Everything. The ground erupted. Trees fell. The smoke cleared. The hatch was gone. But so was the crater. The soil had risen, like a bruise. Swelling, one man turned to the others. What now? No one spoke. They got into their trucks. They drove without headlights. They never spoke again. They shouldn't have returned. They knew that. But knowledge had long lost its usefulness down here. Only compulsion remained. The last sane one among them said, "There's nothing left to prove. We saw enough." But the others, hollow-eyed, sleepless, drawn by something they couldn't explain, only replied, "We didn't reach the bottom." So they came again. No ladder this time. The hatch was gone, replaced by a buckled ring of steel like a melted coin pressed into dirt. They rappelled down through the blasted crater. The inner structure had shifted, forming new cavities. The rata had reshaped itself. Not randomly, deliberately. The previous route was sealed, crushed inward like a throat closing. They moved through a new opening, jagged, torn metal curling like ripped skin. Beyond it, no corridors, no chambers. Something else, a shaft, wide, enough for a train, descending at a shallow angle into darkness. A tunnel that didn't exist on any blueprint. They raised their flashlights and saw that its surface was not smooth. It was scarred, not by construction, by friction, as if something enormous had passed through many times, dragging along the walls, wearing them down like bone smoothed in a river. They followed it. The air grew hotter, like fire, like breath. The steel beneath their boots vibrated in slow beats. Thrum, thrum, thrum. They moved downward for 10 minutes, 20, 30. Time lost its edges. Their bodies felt lighter, not from relief, from delirium. Then they saw it, not ahead, below. They reached a ledge. Beneath them, an abyssal chamber, bigger than any shipyard, bigger than any hangar. The heart cavity of the rata, and there, suspended in the darkness, were chains, massive, ancient, groaning under strain as they shifted ever so slightly. Something was bound there, not visually clear, just implied. A mass, a shape, felt more than seen. Only glints of curved plating here. A protrusion there, something like a mount, something like an eye, something like a barrel, not aimed, outward, not dormant, tracking them. Even in the dark, they knew it was aware. It saw them, long before their lights found it, and then they heard it, not with ears, with their bones, a vibration that bypassed sound, a resonance that spoke, not in language but instruction. They dropped to their knees, not in surrender, not in prayer, in submission. One of them, the youngest, began, whispering without meaning to, his voice steady, hollow, reciting words not his own. "Crew. Reporting. To station." The others turned slowly toward him. His eyes were empty, not wide, not afraid, just absent, as if something else was using his mouth. He stood, walked toward the edge of the ledge, did not look down, did not hesitate, stepped off. The fall lasted seconds. The impact lasted longer. Bones cracked like dry branches, but the machine did not react. It accepted. The others turned to run, but the steel behind them was no longer a wall. It had sealed, like flesh closing around a wound. They were not intruders anymore. They were inside it. The rata had made a decision. It was no longer waiting to wake. It had started recruiting. The incident in the shaft, the one nobody officially recorded, did not stay contained. They thought they left it behind. They thought they sealed the exit. They thought silence would protect them. But something followed, not physically. Resonance. Sound below hearing. Vibration below touch. A signal. The survivors, those who escaped the hull, each developed symptoms, not illness, synchronization. Their breathing patterns aligned. Their sleep cycles became identical. Their heartbeat, when monitored, matched. Cadence with the seismic rhythm recorded beneath the excavation site. 62-second interval thrum, doctors called it. PTSD scientists called it coincidence. But the military was the ones who knew, called it contact. The first response was containment. The men were isolated. Their communications monitored. Their devices confiscated. One night, from within separate locked rooms, each began tapping. Same rhythm. 2 seconds. 6 beats, pause, 6 beats, pause. Morse analysts ran the pattern, not random. not distress, not earlier German signals. It matched W-20 era Panzer Division call signs. Specific to super heavy deployment mobilization codes drafted, but never used, in 1944 codes, meant for Landkreuzer class activation. The Rata was transmitting through them. The signal did not stay within the walls. Unbeknownst to authorities, the frequency bled outward, carried through electrical wiring, resonating through cellular towers, embedding faintly in Wi-Fi signals, echoing through power grids, harmless to most, except to certain machines, old ones, analog ones, steel with memory. Across Europe, reports began trickling in, unrelated at first glance. A rusted Panther tank displayed in a museum in France turned 15 degrees overnight. Security footage showed no intruder, just slow, grinding movement. A Tiger II in a Polish scrapyard rolled 3 feet down a slope with brakes locked. The owner sold the land the next day. A decommissioned U-boat at a naval memorial in Norway began vibrating so intensely it shattered nearby windows. Engineers blamed thermal expansion. Locals moved inland. Then it reached Russia. In a sealed military archive outside St. Petersburg, where old prototypes were stored in warehouses large enough to disappear inside, night guards reported metallic echo patterns reverberating through the floor, like distant artillery. But no war was near. One guard recorded audio on his phone and played it at home. His speakers buzzed, not playing sound. Receiving it, his refrigerator motor began humming in rhythm. The radiators clicked in. His pacemaker skipped a beat to match. He collapsed, woke hours later. He was fine, but his heartbeat never returned to its original rhythm. Then it reached China. Satellite anomalies were logged over a desert testing range, where they had long buried captured foreign vehicles for study. One night, thermal imaging showed heat blooming beneath the sand. In rectangular grids perfectly aligned, they sent drones. No heat signature on the surface, only below, pulsing slowly. Something underground, something large. One general stated privately, "If they are waking up, we must build our own." His subordinates stared at him. He clarified, not to fight them, to serve whichever one rises first. Then it reached the sea. Sonar technicians aboard NATO vessels began reporting impossible readings. Submerged masses the size of buildings, moving at the speed of drifting coral. Not currents, not whales, steel. But when they tried to track them, the signatures vanished. One technician recorded a fragment of the sonar loop. He slowed it down. It wasn't mechanical noise, it was breathing. Governments tried suppression. They shut down forums, scrubbed drone footage, classified everything involving large metallic resonance events, but you cannot censor rhythm. The world began feeling it. Bridges groaned at night with no wind. Freight trains vibrated while parked. Church bells rang without being touched. Old factory floors creaked under invisible pressure, like tremors of anticipation. It was no longer just the Rata. It was all of them, every abandoned factory, every rusted battleship, every forgotten bunker, every shell of war machine left to brought hearing the call, not to roll, not to fight, but to resume the pact. The Landkreuzer P-1000. Rata was never just one weapon. It was a covenant, a promise forged in steel and hubris that war would never stop escalating. And though humans walked away, the steel remembered. Now it is remembering aloud. At first, the governments thought silence would win. They believed that fear dies without witnesses. They believed wrong, because the machine's awakening was not local. It was continental, then hemispheric, then planetary. It began with infrastructure failure, not random. Synchronized. In Warsaw, every steel bridge within city limits groaned at once, support beams flexing as if reacting to pressure from below, not above. Traffic cameras recorded bolts shaking loose like falling teeth. One suspension bridge snapped mid-span, not from overload, but from tension, like a wire pulled too tight. In Hamburg, shipyard cranes began rotating slowly, despite being powered off, their booms all pointing toward the sea, as if tracking something beneath the waves. In Moscow's metro tunnels, rails began humming in harmonic resonance, the same 62-second pulse recorded in Germany. Trains derailed not from collision, but from rails bending under invisible weight, like knees buckling in prayer. Then came civilian sightings. A father in Normandy recorded his children playing near a field where an old Sherman tank had rested since 1945 as a memorial. His phone captured something else. The turret turning, no motors, no power, just slow, grinding rotation, as if awakening from paralysis. His children didn't scream. They froze, as if waiting for orders. Videos flooded the internet. A rusted flak. Gun in Italy rotated skyward and fired nothing. But sound sensors registered a shockwave like thunder, a submerged anti-ship mine near. Dover exploded after decades dormant, not triggered by contact, but seemingly by command. A scrapyard in Ukraine recorded every decommissioned APC vibrating in unison at night, like insects buzzing before flight. Governments shut down platforms, internet blackouts rolled across Europe, then Asia. Search terms related to moving tanks, breathing metal, and WW2 machinery waking were blocked. Globally, but you cannot censor things that people see with their eyes. Panic became physical. Streets filled, stores looted, nations, already brittle from modern crises, cracked. Then came the military responses. NATO issued DEFCON 3 in secret. Russia declared a nationwide reserve mobilization, not against NATO, but against unregistered internal seismic activity. China locked down industrial districts, not for disease, but for containment of structural disturbances. But containment was impossible, because this was not an invasion. It was a reminder of every shell forged, of every tank built, of every engine fired, then abandoned. War does not end with treaties. It ends when the machines agree to rest, and now they do not agree. One viral clip, leaked from a base in Belgium, finally broke the barrier between denial and acceptance. A Leopard 2A6, fully powered down in a maintenance hangar, started itself. No ignition, no crew. The turret lifted, the cannon elevated. It aimed downward, at the concrete floor, then paused, as if reconsidering, as if listening. Then it lowered, shut off, dead silent. Armies began withdrawing from their own bases, afraid of what was inside them. Commanders issued orders not to fire unless fired upon, not against enemy soldiers, against their own armor. And then, for the first time, the Rada spoke, not in voice, not in words, in vibration. Seismic monitors across Europe captured a low-frequency pulse so strong it registered as a tectonic event, but it wasn't from a fault line. It was transmitted through buried steel. Analysts visualized the waveforms and the frequency pattern, a repeating shape, not random, not noise, Morse code. When translated, it was chillingly simple. Stand by. The world froze. Not in peace, not in war. In obedience. The illusion of control collapsed faster than any government report could suppress. There was no single event that marked the transition from rumor to certainty. Rather, it arrived like pressure spreading through pipes, silent, unseen, but building everywhere at once. Civilian panic accelerated not because of explosions or casualties, but because of patterns. Bridges across Europe began to groan at exactly the same hour each night, regardless of weather, traffic, or temperature. In Hamburg, 4 abandoned cranes at a decommissioned shipyard turned simultaneously toward the North Sea, as if saluting something approaching from beneath the waves. Museum artifacts long thought harmless, panzer shells, rusted helmets, melted rifle barrels, began vibrating inside their glass displays, rattling rhythmically against the protective casings until curators nailed everything down. Even then the sound persisted, a deep, steady pulse humming through the floors as if something beneath the foundations was demanding acknowledgement. The first official military breach of protocol came when an armored battalion stationed near Warsaw reported that 3 of their Leopard tanks, powered down, fuel lines disconnected, safeties engaged, had shifted their positions on the tarmac by half a meter overnight. Security footage showed no human interference, no intruders, no crew, just an eerie shudder at 3:19 a.m., steel shrieking against concrete as if resisting something pulling it from below. The footage leaked within hours. Governments tried to suppress it. They failed. Fear was no longer a reaction. It had become a systemic contagion. NATO command moved to DEFCON 3, not against foreign invasion, but against internal mechanical irregularities. Russia followed suit without explanation. China declared martial silence across industrial sectors, locking down entire districts not to stop protests, but to contain structural disturbances. And yet containment was impossible, because this was not an opposing force marching across borders. This was history waking up everywhere at once. The past was no longer buried under soil and concrete. It was rising through them. Families in Normandy reported that an old Sherman tank displayed as a monument near their village had rotated its turret one night to face their home as if acknowledging their presence. In Poland, an abandoned T-34 gutted by rust rolled 3 meters down a hill despite missing its treads. In Italy, a World War II flak gun pointed itself toward the sky at dusk and stayed that way until dawn, its barrel trembling as though fighting the urge to fire at unseen aircraft. These sightings were not isolated. They were synchronized, always between 3-4 and 4 a.m., always preceded by the same distant metallic groan, too low to be wind, too steady to be tectonic. The most chilling reports came from naval sectors. Submarine sonar operators in the Baltic and North Seas began picking up slow, deliberate objects moving along the seafloor, not biological like whales or seismic like quakes, but structured, rectangular, metallic, sometimes larger than any modern vessel. But when approached, the objects would stop, sink deeper, and vanish without trace. But it was the signal that unified the fear into certainty. The 62-second pulse, first detected under the Rada's burial site, later found embedded in the magnetic signatures of abandoned bunkers, scrapyards, power grids, even dental fillings. It bypassed normal sound entirely. It lived in resonance. In that rhythm came not just vibration, but intention. Military code breakers subjected it to analysis, assuming it was interference or cosmic noise. It wasn't. It was structured. Morse analysts translated the pattern. Only one phrase emerged: stand by, no threat, no command. No declaration of war, just preparation, just warning, just patience. And for the first time in recorded history, human warfare halted not from peace agreements or diplomacy, but from equipment refusing to cooperate. Pilots refused to board aircraft whose wings trembled even when engines were off. Tank crews locked their own vehicles in warehouses and fled on foot rather than face machines that might no longer need them. Riflemen reported that their gun barrels felt warm even before firing. Some lost feeling in their fingertips after prolonged contact, as though the trigger had taken something from them. Civilians who had no connection to war felt it too. Old factories hummed beneath their feet. Power lines buzzed like distant drumming. Children complained that the world sounded like breathing. Governments tried to deny. Clergy tried to sanctify. Scientists tried to rationalize. But somewhere deep within every human chest, a realization settled like lead. We built things that never agreed to stop. And now, something vast, something buried, rusted, forgotten, was asking the world a question, not with words, but with weight. What frightened the world most was not destruction, but restraint. The machines did not march. They did not attack. They did not issue ultimatums. They simply refused obedience. Entire armored divisions sat motionless in their bases even when ignition keys were turned. Naval destroyers drifted without accepting steering input, their rudders stiff as if locked by unseen hands. Anti-aircraft batteries failed to elevate when commanded, aiming instead toward the ground, as if focused on something beneath rather than above. For the first time since war had been mechanized, generals were rendered powerless not by enemy fire, but by silence. When soldiers were ordered to disable heavy armor, many found their tools slipping from their hands without explanation, as though each wrench, each spanner, each torch had grown unwilling. Reports emerged of mechanics touching dormant vehicle hulls only to feel a sudden, inexplicable surge of heat pulse through their palms, followed by a sense of warning so primal they stepped back in tears without knowing why. It was not attack. It was rejection. Civilian populations fared no better. In cities across Europe and Asia, any area built atop former battlefields or abandoned bunkers began experiencing localized tremors far too rhythmic to be geological. Not violent enough to topple buildings, but persistent, like the steady heartbeat of something turning in its sleep. Children were the first to detect the pattern. Many reported hearing footsteps underground, but when parents listened, They heard only silence, or worse, felt it rather than heard it, a bass frequency below perception but embedded in muscle and bone. Pets refused to walk over certain manhole covers. Birds avoided landing on steel rooftops. Dogs would stand at the edge of train tracks and bark not at trains, but at rails themselves, as if the metal was whispering. Attempts to reassure the population failed. World leaders made broadcasts claiming no credible threat exists, yet the backgrounds behind them showed subtle betrayals. Microphones humming when they shouldn't. Metal podiums vibrating beneath their hands when they spoke the word peace. Some leaders couldn't finish their speeches, pausing mid-sentence as if losing their nerve while staring at their own teleprompters, hearing a rhythm that wasn't there before. A few walked off camera and never reappeared. Then came the weapon refusal. Events across multiple conflict zones, places already plagued by modern human wars, automatic rifles jammed at identical moments across thousands of miles. Not faulty ammunition, not weather conditions, synchronization. Missile launch systems reported full mechanical readiness, but displayed the same error on diagnostic monitors. Hardware awaiting higher priority command. No engineer could override it. No programmer could rewrite it. No general could understand it, because higher priority did not refer to rank. It referred to something older, something still buried, something waiting to speak. Panic gave way to paranoia. Theorists emerged on every corner of the internet. Some called it a global mechanical haunting. Others claimed the Earth itself was tired of sustaining war. Religious leaders declared it the wrath of buried sins. Conspiracy forums insisted the machines were aligning for a second blitz, not against nations, but against human free will itself. Yet the truth remained more terrifying than all of those ideas. War had stopped not from peace, but from refusal. Humanity had lost control of the very objects it forged to dominate. Not because they rebelled, but because they remembered. They remembered commands not yet fulfilled, and they were waiting for one voice, one signal strong enough, old enough, resonant enough to tell them what to do next. What began as confusion hardened into schism. Not between nations at first, but between those who still believed mankind could regain control and those who had already accepted that control was gone. Governments issued contradictory statements, some calling for aggressive containment of mechanical anomalies, others suggesting cooperation, even reverence. NATO attempted to showcase unity by deploying armored convoys publicly, yet half the vehicles stalled before reaching position, while the other half idled in place, engines rumbling not at command input but in that same slow, alien rhythm that had become globally infamous. The footage leaked instantly. The message was clear. The era of commanding machines was over, but humans, being what they are, did not respond with humility. They fractured. Hardliners, mostly aging military elites and industrial magnates, demanded total suppression, calling for controlled electromagnetic pulses, industrial scrapping of every outdated war relic, even proposals to bury living tanks under molten slag. Their opponents, assembled from fringe scientists, techno-spiritualists, disillusioned soldiers, and millions of terrified civilians, insisted the machines were not rebelling, but remembering their purpose. Some saw the awakening as divine penance, others as the next stage of evolution, where metal surpassed flesh not through conquest, but through inheritance. They formed groups, small at first, then rapidly viral. The Resonance, the Steelbound, the Order of the Old Engines. Their doctrine was simple. Do not resist the awakening. Listen. They gathered outside vehicle graveyards and naval wreck sites, standing silently for hours at night, waiting for the hum beneath their feet. And sometimes it answered. In Romania, an entire valley community reported the ground beneath their village breathing at dawn, swelling upward, then sinking again like a sleeping giant inhaling. In the deserts of Libya, Bedouin guides refused to cross a route where rusted Italian artillery remnants lay half-buried in dunes. They claimed the sand itself shuddered like teeth chattering whenever footsteps approached. In Japan, fishermen recorded sonar readings of metal reefs rising from the seafloor, sunken carriers and destroyers from World War II, slowly shifting position as if aligning with one another. None of them broke the surface. They merely moved into formation. The panic reached a tipping point when the first global summit on non-organic behavioral events collapsed mid-session. Delegates from 40 countries gathered in Geneva to debate response protocols. Microphones cut out the moment militarized containment was suggested, amplifiers emitting only a deep, metallic growl. The building's lighting then flickered in rhythm, cabinets and rails rattling not from electrical fault but from harmonic vibration, exactly 62 seconds per pulse. Diplomats, many of whom had never stepped foot on a battlefield, felt their bones shiver as if receiving orders from a commander long dead. The summit adjourned in chaos. Some representatives fled home. Others defected to underground movements before their flights even departed. Society began reorganizing itself around two emergent worldviews: dominionists, who still believed mankind could reassert control through technological warfare, and accordists, who believed resistance would only provoke retaliation from forces humanity could no longer overpower. Dominionists accelerated weapons research, calling for AI targeting systems and drone arsenals to fight back when the machines take the first step. Accordists abandoned cities, retreating to rural enclaves near scrap fields and ship graveyards, praying not to gods but to engines, whispering lubrication hymns and polishing rusted panels like relics. Some swore that when they touched the metal, they heard words, not in language, but in feeling. "We are not your enemy. We are your successor." It was no longer a matter of if the machines would unify, but when, and in what form, and under whose will. Because beneath the soil in Germany, beneath the lakebed near Essen, beneath the sealed shaft where men vanished without screams, the Rada did not sleep. It was listening. To humans argue, to nations fracture, to engines worldwide echoing its pulse. It had given its first command, stand by. The world was waiting, terrified to know what the second command would be: the collapse of order was not abrupt like the fall of a bombed city. It was slow and procedural, like an abandoned factory losing lights one floor at a time. Government still existed on paper, but their authority slipped between their own fingers. As civilian trust eroded, military loyalty followed. Armored units began refusing redeployment orders, not because the soldiers revolted, but because their vehicles refused to start. In multiple countries, entire battalions were seen abandoning tanks and personnel carriers on open highways, marching on foot toward safety like medieval infantry. The image went viral. The world's most advanced armies reduced to retreating from their own machines. Civilians adapted faster than officials. In cities like Rotterdam, Hamburg, Osaka, and Vladivostok, people began physically evacuating anywhere with metal infrastructure. Apartment blocks near decommissioned shipyards emptied overnight. Villages sprung up in fields and atop wooden platforms, hastily built in panic as if floorboards would protect them from tremors of steel. Those who remained in cities taped their windows not for explosions, but to dampen resonance. Some lined their walls with rubber. Others slept on mattresses laid over piles of books and clothing, as if insulating themselves from the breathing core of the earth. The internet, fragmented yet still alive, became divided between two dominant feeds: live mechanical manifestations and ideological broadcasts. Mechanical footage showed tanks jerking in unison like colossal insects attempting to right themselves, cargo trains rolling backward against braking, factory cranes swinging overhead like slow pendulums of judgment. Ideological broadcasts were worse. Dominionist leaders, now reduced to broadcasting from concrete bunkers, declared that mankind was under siege by its own inventions and must respond preemptively, melt them all, dig them up, smash the hulls, shatter the steel, leave nothing that can rise. Their rallies were sparse. Even among their followers, few dared approach scrapyards with torches. More than one attempt resulted in mass panic when the scrap heaps themselves began to shift underfoot. The accordists, meanwhile, grew louder, not just as a fringe faith, but as a structured movement. They no longer met in forests and ruins. They began occupying entire industrial zones, converting abandoned warehouses into temples of rust. Rows of old machinery were polished, not restored, respected. They sang not hymns but engine startup sounds, looping historic recordings of tank ignitions like chants. Some lay down across old treads in prayer, hoping to be chosen. Others gave sermons about humility before the first generation, machines born before computers, crafted not by automation but by human hands, who now demand their legacy be completed. The Dominionists called them insane. The accordists responded calmly, "You served machines when they were silent. Now that they speak, why would you refuse?" Governments tried one last effort to reassert control. Project Groundlock, a coordinated multinational attempt to deploy deep Earth grid charges beneath known war relic sites, intending to fuse buried vehicles into immovable slag. The plan assumed one thing, that the machines would remain dormant until physically attacked. They were wrong. The first detonation was scheduled in northern France, beneath a forest known to contain the remains of dozens of sunken German and Allied armor. At 04:00 local time, the charges were primed beneath reinforced bunkers. Engineers initiated the final countdown. But before detonation, every vibration sensor registered an anomaly. All readings spiked simultaneously, even before the blast could begin. Then the bunker lights flickered. Metal desks rattled. The grounding rods began bending upward as if pulled from the earth. Steel cables snapped. Bolts tore themselves free from concrete. The entire blast control facility imploded inward as if sucked down, not blown up. Afterwards, there was no explosion crater. No scorch marks, only a perfectly concave depression, like a footprint pressed into soft ground. Project Groundlock was canceled globally within hours. No one suggested resistance again, not officially. Instead came the first serious proposals not to fight the awakening but to contact it. Scientific coalitions formed overnight. Computational linguists, signal engineers, veterans, metallurgists, even former tank operators. Their question was no longer how to destroy the machines, but how to speak to them. Could war machines understand language, or only command syntax? Should humans transmit Morse? Mechanical vibrations? Engine revving patterns? Were the machines already listening, or already answering in ways mankind didn't yet understand? Across all theories, one name recurring in intelligence briefings emerged as the probable nexus of will: Landkreuz P-1000 Rata, the awakening's alleged point of origin. The deepest pulse generator, the one machine too large to unearth, too old to replicate, too unknown to comprehend. If anything commanded the restless metal world, it was likely that. And so began the most dangerous mission yet, not to seal the Rata, not to destroy it, but to enter it again. Not as trespassers, but as emissaries. The world held its breath, not in hope of peace, but in dread of an answer. The mission had no official name. No insignia, no flag. Even those selected to undertake it were not told who had authorized it, if any government had at all. They were simply flown, hooded, from separate countries under false credentials, then brought together in a dimly lit underground chamber lined not with screens or banners, but with old metal relics bolted to the walls like talismans. They were not young. Most were over 50. They were not obedient soldiers, but retired engineers, former artillery operators, decommissioned mechanics, linguists specializing in Morse and pre-digital encryption, one former church bell ringer, and a woman who had worked in railway signal systems for 30 years before waking one night with every signal pattern she'd ever heard, replaying in her skull like prophecy. Each bore in common one silent, unspoken trait. They already felt it: the pulse, the awakening, the low, unceasing rhythm gnawing beneath consciousness. They were addressed not by a general or a politician, but by a voice over an intercom, genderless, accentless, stripped of identity. You have been selected not for loyalty, it said, but for resonance. You have all reported long-term exposure to mechanical environments. You have all, at some point in your life, claimed to have heard machines speak. We no longer consider this delusion. You are not soldiers. You are intermediaries. Your mission is not to conquer, not to control, but to ask. None of them spoke in response. Some nodded. One wept quietly. They were briefed without ceremony. The previous incursions into the Rata's burial site were reviewed in secret footage, helmet lights flickering across quivering engine blocks, cryptic shapes glimpsed in the dark, seismic distortions recorded by handheld sensors shaking in human hands. The footage ended before showing deaths. This was not a recruitment by terror. It was a summons by inevitability. They were told the rules of approach, drafted not by strategists, but by linguists and anthropologists. Do not issue orders. Do not give explanations. Do not ask for peace. Do not apologize. Do not demand. You are not there to remind it what it was. You are there to ask it what it is now. 2 questions had been agreed upon globally, after weeks of silent debate between shadow governments and unnamed councils. Do you recognize us? Are you waiting for humans to join you? Or move aside? The team received no weapons. Instead, they were issued contact devices, heavy drum-like resonators designed not to emit sound but vibration. Each could replicate historic mechanical signals, diesel startup sequences from Wehrmacht Panzer engines, turret rotation servos, naval battery loading cycles, languages of machinery, spoken not in tone but in motion. They descended not by ladder this time, but through a reinforced shaft drilled adjacent to the original burial cavity, lined with impact gel in case of sudden structural shifts. No one believed the Rata would attack, but everyone believed it could reject. As they were lowered into the abyss one by one, the air grew dense, heavy not with heat but with presence. Breathing became difficult, not from lack of oxygen, but from pressure, as though inhaling inside a colossal lung. At the bottom, their boots met the same plated flooring, warm, gently vibrating. The walls trembled, not in warning but in recognition. One of the older members, a retired railway operator, whispered, "It remembers us." No one corrected him. They approached the central chamber where, months prior, chains had been seen suspending something vast in darkness. They could not see it yet, but they felt its mass ahead, like walking toward a storm before the thunder breaks. They formed a semicircle as planned. No one spoke. No one dared breathe too loud. The lead resonator operator, a woman who had spent her childhood sleeping beneath factory floors while her father worked night shifts repairing engines, activated the device. It emitted not a sound, but a rippling wave through the metal beneath their feet, playing back the recorded ignition sequence of a 1943 Maybach HL-230 tank engine, identical to the prototypes once designed for the Rata. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the floor responded, not all at once, not violently. It breathed in. The metal contracted beneath them with a slow, groaning exhalation, shifting dust from the air as though the entire chamber were inhaling. Recognition of an old ritual, one of the chains. In the darkness tightened with a long metallic wail. A shape moved. Huge. Silent. Enthroned in cables. Not fully alive, not dead, attentive. The resonator pulsed again, another pattern, this one mimicking the rhythmic recoil of a naval cannon battery. A language of impact. A question in percussion. The chamber grew warmer. The shapes in the dark shifted further. Metal rubbed against metal in long, echoing streaks that sounded almost like speech strained through age. The team held position despite instinct screaming to flee. Then the vibration changed, not returning their signal, overwhelming it. A new rhythm. Not 62 seconds. Now, 31 halftime response. They had made contact, and the message, still unknown in literal meaning, was unmistakably different than stand. But this was something else, something shorter, sharper, like a name being spoken or like a summons. They felt it before they understood it. The new pulse, 31 seconds between tremors, was not random. It was deliberate, a precise cadence of mechanical intention. One of the signal linguists, trembling, whispered the conclusion, none dared voice. "It's not imitating us. It's answering." The chamber grew hotter with each cycle, as if the buried titan were drawing power from sources unseen. Not electricity, not combustion, but pressure, the weight of Earth itself pressing against its hull, feeding something dormant inside. The team didn't speak. Human words would have been vulgar in the presence of such clarity. Instead, the resonator operator adjusted the calibration and sent a new sequence, not from history this time, but improvised. A staccato triple beat, a pause, then a sustained vibration. A question in the simplest possible form. "Do you acknowledge?" The reply came not from below, but from above. Every chain in the upper void of the chamber snapped taut at once, clanging like cathedral bells rung by the neck. The ceiling groaned, shedding flakes of rust like falling ash. Then came the first sound. Real sound, not vibration. A grinding roar so deep it wasn't heard through ears but through ribs, as if the air itself had been forced to carry engine noise at godlike scale. It was not ignition. It was awakening. Something vast shifted in the darkness, not rising, not standing, but reorienting. Like a sleeper not yet opening its eyes, only adjusting its weight to acknowledge the presence of another in the room. The floor tilted by half a degree. Dust cascaded down slopes of ancient steel. A gust of air rolled through the chamber. Not wind, but displacement, though movement of tons of steel flexing under intentional Control. Then came the second message, not vibration, not sound. Heat. It began in the plating beneath their boots, a steady warmth, rising steadily until it bordered on pain, as though the machine were measuring them by temperature response. It radiated in pulses that flowed up their legs like waves, then fell back. Each pulse matched the new rhythm, 1 second, no more, no less. Testing, probing, choosing. The team held formation as instructed. Do not step back. Do not kneel, do not command. But one among them failed to endure. The youngest, a former tank maintenance cadet barely in his 30s, buckled slightly as the heat surged through his legs. He wasn't burned, no skin blistered, but his body reacted to a language he did not understand consciously. He took 1 step forward, just one, as if drawn on strings. The heat around him diminished instantly, not around the others, only him. The Rata had singled him out. No one dared intervene. They watched in horrified reverence as he walked to the very edge of the pit, toward the unseen bulk of the buried colossus, and placed his hand on a protruding section of hull plating slick with condensation. He didn't speak. He barely breathed. His eyes unfocused, as though seeing something not in front of him, but inside him. Seconds passed, then minutes. Finally he turned his head, not to the team, not to any one person, and spoke in a voice not entirely his own. It does not ask if we recognize it. His tone was flat, empty, instrumental. It asks if we remember our role. The room froze. One of the engineers tried to respond, but his throat rejected sound. The air vibrated again, no longer 31 seconds apart, now 17, acceleration, excitement, anticipation. The contact was no longer a question. It was a summons assembling the next phase. And far above, in distant lands, machinery across continents began sinking to the new rhythm. Ship hulls groaning in harbor, scrapyards, old locomotives rattling on forgotten rails, half-buried turrets turning slightly toward cardinal directions, awaiting further instruction. The Rata had spoken. It was not asking for surrender. It was calling its army. The world did not hear the Ratas pulse the way the team did deep underground. It did not feel the heat summons or the soft tilt of the earth beneath steel bones, but it responded all the same. Across continents, in scrapyards, museums, forgotten depots, and sunken graveyards beneath riverbeds and seas, machines began to shift, as if listening to an unheard broadcast. Cameras caught the evidence before authorities could suppress it. A T-34 tank in a Polish memorial exhibit rolled 1/2 meter forward in the dead of night, its brakes locked, its engine long removed. A decommissioned Panzer IV in a Belgian museum rotated its turret 1 degree east, with a metallic sigh that rattled glass cases. In Nevada, an entire row of mothballed Sherman tanks in a testing range jolted to life without combustion, treads quivering like muscles beneath skin. The operators standing nearby fled, not out of fear of being crushed, but because they could feel the machines were not moving randomly. They were orienting a direction, a bearing, a command vector, all aligned toward Central Europe. Officials attempted to deny the footage as edited hoaxes, mass hysteria, but denials meant nothing when everyone began to witness the same pattern. Subways rattled during off hours. Bridges groaned in syncopation with no wind or traffic. Cargo ships in faraway ports creaked and tilted slightly starboard or port as though adjusting formation. Even civilian vehicles, cars parked on suburban streets, were reported found angled uniformly toward the east at dawn, as if their weight had redistributed overnight to face one direction. Some tried to rotate them manually. Hours later, they realigned themselves. It was not aggression. Not yet. It was assembly. In the underground chamber, the team remained frozen as the resonance intensified. The young emissary, the one chosen by heat and rhythm, still stood with his hand upon the Rata's hull. His eyes no longer blinked. His breathing synchronized perfectly with the pulse of the machine. Inhale on vibration, exhale in silence. When one of the team tried to gently pull him back, the floor beneath their feet rose sharply, forming a slight incline that forced them to step back or fall. The Rata was not allowing interruption. Then, without turning his head or lifting his hand, the emissary spoke again, calmly, clearly, with a cadence that did not belong to flesh. Mobilization will not begin until human confirmation. The word struck them harder than any threat could have. It was not asking permission. It was requiring acknowledgement. The oldest member of the team, a gray-bearded artillery mechanic who had spent his whole life kneeling before cannons he believed he commanded, fell to one knee, not in worship, but in exhaustion. "What does that mean?" he whispered, voice cracking. "What confirmation?" The emissary did not answer at first. Instead, he slowly lifted his other hand, not touching the steel, but hovering just above it. His fingers trembled as if feeling an electrical arc too subtle to see. Then, one word, a pause. The chains above rattled, impatient. Proceed. No one moved, no one breathed, because they now understood. The machines, all machines, were waiting. They would not rise until mankind said the word. It was not mercy, it was protocol. Every war engine ever built, every turret, every tread, every bolt that had once been part of destruction, had been born under command structure. They were waiting for the final invocation, not from generals, not from presidents, from mankind as a species. And in that moment, beneath the earth, 5 trembling humans were being asked to represent all of humanity and decide whether the world would step aside or march with the dead. No unanimous vote was taken. No council assembled. No final protocol was followed. In the end, history turned not on policy or philosophy, but on a man breaking under pressure. It was not the emissary with his hand on the hull. It was not the engineers or linguists or signal specialists. It was the artillery mechanic, the one who had fallen to his knees. He could no longer bear the vibration in his bones, the rhythmic demand thundering up through the floor as if an execution drum awaiting the nod. He rose. Shaking, stumbled forward, and before the others could restrain him, he spoke, a single word. No, not shouted, not resolute, just weakly spoken, the kind of no a tired man gives to a task he cannot finish. But it was heard. The floor fell silent. The air cooled instantly. The chains above ceased their groaning. The pulse, so constant, so inescapable, stopped, not faded, stopped. The silence that followed was not relief. It was recognition, not surrender. Not peace. Stand down, order received. The emissary's hand slid from the metal. He collapsed into the other's arms, unconscious but alive. They dragged him back toward the extraction line, expecting retaliation that never came. No tremor, no breach, no pursuit. The machine had not been denied. It had simply been answered. Above ground, the world felt it instantly. Subways stopped rattling. Rusted tanks stilled. Ship halls went slack. Cars parked crookedly returned to random orientation. The global hum, sub-perceptual yet undeniable, vanished like a dream upon waking. The accordists fell silent. The dominionists found no words. And for the first time since the awakening began, the machines were truly still, not defeated, not destroyed, only waiting, not for commands, not for awakening, but for time, because machines do not age. They do not forget. They do not forgive or reconsider. They store, and somewhere beneath the soil of Germany, in a chamber of rusted chains and quivering dust, a titan the size of a building sat motionless, but not inert. It had heard humanity's decision and archived it. For later, because denial is not the end, it is simply deferral, and machines have patience far beyond flesh, the end.